Alright, so I'm going to give you a bit of an idea of how I might go about analysing this first part for your in-class assessment. I'll be as quick as possible, so forgive how fast I talk. Alright, so the first thing we do is that we look at the contextual information we're given. Now the purpose of this analysis that you're doing is to produce a reading of the following text. That's important. What we know is that this is the first scene of a 1981 play called Educating Rita. We know that the author is called Willie Russell and that he's British. This is important stuff here. The information we're then given is that this is about the relationship between a young Liverpool working class hairdresser and Dr. Frank Bryant, a middle-aged university lecturer during the course of a year. So already, just from contextual information, we can get a sense for the kind of story this would be. We're already seeing a difference in class between the two people, so we can kind of infer here that this is a play that's going to be about social class. And it's set in a university here, so it's going to be about social class and education and all those markers that are there, which we can then look at our knowledge of the 1980s to think, well, perhaps these issues were coming to the fore more and more in that period. Then we go and look at the ending of the text. This is what I tell you to do. I tell you to go to the very last lines and to see if there's anything in there for you to look at. So here, our last bit here, do you get a lot like me? I beg your pardon? Do you get a lot of students like me? No, not exactly. No. And so then we have at the end here that the person who set this for you is intending for this last line here to kind of complete, to wrap up the entire piece. So when you go back and reread the whole thing, you go back and read it in light of that ending. Okay, so now we've got this sense of where it's going. It's going in this text, and we can also see where it's come from the context here. One thing I didn't mention at the start was that the word young is in there, a young Liverpool working class hairdresser. So the idea of age there will be something we could go looking for if we're looking for an analysis of how this is going to be put together. So then let's have a look at the information we're given from the very beginning. We're seeing here that's a bookline tutorial room on the first floor of a Victorian-built university in the north of England. This sets our setting and our assumptions about the setting, a place of learning. But it's also when we know that we're looking at stuff here to do with class, we can start thinking about how education is something that has historically reinforced rigid class structures, that higher learning was only available to people who belonged to the higher classes. Now I'm going to be careful not to go on too much here because this video could end up turning into something really quite large. So I just want to draw your attention to some of the key ideas, the key things that caught my eye when I was looking at this text. The first is this first section here where we have Frank talking to himself and looking through his bookshelves. And what we have here is the contrast between what he's looking at and then why he's doing it. So we're seeing Eliot, Euripides, Dickens, and then he's glad to have found Charles Dickens because he's got a bottle of scotch hidden behind it. So that gives us something about the character, the construction of the character. But it's also quite amusing, it's quite funny that he'd be hiding his scotch behind these great works of literature. What we're also given here as this kind of shortcut by Willie Russell is his reaction to the story that's about to come, and we're given that straight away. The first thing we have is a phone call from Frank's wife, and he's talking to her about because of this open university woman coming this evening. He has this attitude about the tutorial he has to run with this woman, and well, he's just really not up for it. What I find particularly interesting here is this line here. I have to go to the pub afterwards only to mercifully wash away some silly woman's attempt to get into the mind of Henry James or Thomas Hardy, or whoever the hell it is we're supposed to study on this course. We've got 2 points we can make about that. We've got here that about the class stuff that I mentioned, but also this some silly woman, the way he's quite patronising to women is probably, and even quite chauvinistic, we can see in the language. So Willie Russell has already set up this professor to be chauvinistic, self-important. Sure, he's educated, but we can start to see here that Willie Russell's probably going to chip away at these assumptions, at that that it's not so great to be so educated or to belong to a higher class or anything like that, and that we can start to see here that perhaps the lower class woman is going to perhaps educate him. So going back to the meaning of the title Educating Rita, already in this we can see a kind of narrative arc where we're going to see that reversal. The teacher ends up learning from the student. So now we have the entrance of the reader of the title, and it begins with a knock at the door. It's quite conventional for drama, but already we've got this, it's already set up with this conflict and this noise that's there, this insistent knocking on the door, and Frank being torn away from the phone call with his wife. I wonder even if that could work somewhat symbolically. You got two women already in this opening scene. You have the wife on the phone and Rita in the scene, and Frank having to choose between the two. That could it be foreshadowing? You'd have to read the whole play to find out. And so we see more knocking at the door, so the noise is increasing, and then Frank being able to hang up on his wife. The door swings open, revealing Rita. "I am coming in, aren't I? It's that stupid bleeding handle on the door. You want to get it fixed." Her first line is there just to clearly establish where she's coming from. We get her accent and the way she speaks, and it's quite clearly the opposite of Frank. And then we have Frank being caught on the back foot. All before this, we had Frank in charge on the stage. He's there kind of telling how it's going to be, and he's the one doing all the talking, and he's quite belligerent. And the moment Rita comes in, he's caught on the back foot. So already this narrative is being established. This student teaching the teacher narrative is already there. But what we have here, an important thing in this, is the way Willie Russell constructs language of the character of Rita to be so clearly at the opposite end of the class spectrum to Frank. And the markers of this class structure are the truncations of words, like "yeah" instead of "you," and the way she says, because ever the poor bastard on the other side of the door won't be able to come in, and you won't be able to get out. That there's this clear, rough language being used by Rita to establish that clear class difference. I'm also interested in this particular first exchange here. "Now you are? What am I? Pardon? What? You are? I'm a what?" It's this battle of wordplay here between this polite "now you are" and Rita taking him literally. "I am a what?" as opposed to what Frank is clearly asking is, "Now who are you?" And Rita is reversing that on him. She's not doing it deliberately, but we can see here through the language that there's going to be this battle of wills, or battle of the sexes even, based around language, battle of the class based around language, and trying to come to a common language. Now, something I didn't draw your attention to in looking at the first scene and looking at the stage directions is the choices Willie Russell made for what should be on stage. And here we have a really important one here. Rita looking at the nude print that was signposted at the start of the play as needing to be on the stage, and it's really important. And we see why it's really important in this scene as it emerges right here. What's interesting here is that Rita is able to make Frank uncomfortable, and we can look at his discomfort in that in itself. That she draws his attention to this nude image that he hasn't even looked at in years, and there's an obvious discomfort on his part. And again, we're reminded of the class difference right here, where Rita makes the point that, yep, it is meant to be there. It is meant to be erotic. And again, we can see Frank here being quite uncomfortable. Now, the interesting part here is that looking at the stage directions, and it's really important to look at stage directions when analysing a drama piece, because I mean, for a number of reasons, they're not actually visible in themselves to an audience, but they're the directions that the playwright wants to ring through, and you want to consider why the reasons for that. And so here we've got, she's been quite genuine here, truly believing that she regards what as educated people can and to converse in such a way. And so what we're seeing here is Willie Russell talking about this idea of being educated as being some form of a performance. And then there's the opportunity to talk about that performance. The irony here is that this is also being performed on a stage, and that being educated isn't an objective reality. It's something, again, that we perform. What we also get here is a sense of, I guess, earthy kind of common sense logic. And what I'm talking about here is Rita challenging Frank. You don't paint pictures like that just so that people can admire the brushstrokes, do you? No, you're probably right. And what we've got here is Rita taking this nude painting, which we imagine will be quite artistic. We've seen many of them in art galleries around the place, but she brings it down to earth with something with a logic that can't be challenged, and it's almost challenging all of those artifacts, all of those objects that mark out higher class and educated people. The educated people could have a nude picture on the wall and have it made art, but if there's a nude picture on a garage wall, it becomes pornography. And so then just through context and through meaning, we have class barriers being challenged here by these characters. And interesting here, Frank, I think it's very beautiful. Rita, I didn't ask you if it was beautiful. So we have Rita insisting here on being treated as an equal. I didn't ask you if it was beautiful. I wanted to have an honest conversation with you about it, is what's underlying that image. And then we have the beginnings of an intellectual conversation, and then Rita taking the conversation to its conclusion. Do you get a lot like me? I beg your pardon? Do you get a lot of students like me? Not exactly, no. Now there's two meanings in that ending. One, it's this, does he have a lot of open university students? So these open university students are people regular people who have signed up to go and get a degree later in life. But the other meaning to this is, do you get a lot of people like me as students? It works on a number of layers. This last passage, and we get this sense right now of what this narrative is going to become. That this is going to become a narrative where Rita's working class, common sense logic challenges Frank's upper class, self-important, educated thinking. And it becomes a bit of a battle between the two. And again, that story where it begins with a teacher and a student, and the student, in fact, teaches the teacher. So here are some of the key ideas that you could use to talk about the text. First, the text is about breaking down class barriers. And Willie Russell uses language not just in terms of the diction, the word choices, but in terms of the sounds of language. And so through accent and through the truncations of word to mark out class barriers and to show up those differences, and then to challenge the assumptions about how a class society makes assumptions about people based on the sounds of how they speak. Stage props become important symbols for conversations about class. So in particular, the nude painting becomes a subject of the conversation in the scene. But also we see the books at the start being used as markers of the educated class, and how indeed Frank himself kind of subverts them by turning them into places to hide his bottle of scotch. The two characters used to represent class groups. They're not just individuals on a stage. They represent bodies of ideas. They represent whole social groups, and for conversations about those. Ideas about gender are intermingled with class in this. It's not simply about a professor and a working class person. It's about a male professor and a working class woman. And so then there are interesting subtexts that we could go looking for and be wondering about what might emerge in the play itself. And we see some language for it where he refers to her as some silly woman. And so it's a recognizable kind of phrase there to assume that that women are somehow inherently less intelligent than men or less deserving of an education can be implied from that, and Willie Russell could be critiquing those assumptions. So definitely a conversation about class to be had there. And then ideas that are presented in this are important in the context. You might not know much about 1981 specifically, you might not know about Margaret Thatcher in England, but you could kind of, if you've got some general knowledge about the 20th century, you'd know that in the 1980s, barriers for education were being broken down, and feminism itself was taking more of a centre stage. And so this text comes at an important time, and so that it also means that the ideas in this text are speaking directly to topical ideas from 1981. So I hope that's helpful to you, to see how you went on the essay you did during the week, and feel free to come and talk to me about it.